Hello and welcome to the Business Talk podcast. I'm your host Deepak. We are delighted to welcome Dr. Neha Chatwani, the esteemed founder of the Workplace Atelier based in Vienna, Austria. In this episode, Dr. Neha will be sharing valuable insights from her second and latest book, Thriving in Disruption, Agile Organizations, Collective Leadership, and New Work, providing a deeper understanding of how organizations can thrive in today's fast evolving landscape. Dr. Neha holds a background in psychology and business administration with extensive experience in human resources and organizational development. She serves a diverse clientele, including the United Nations, multinational corporations, NGOs, and startups. An accomplished academic and author, she has published extensively with notable works, including Organizational Agility and contributions to Forbes and the Global Peter Drucker Forum. Dr. Neha also serves as a doctoral thesis supervisor at UNICAF, a Pan-African online leading university that collaborates with several UK universities. Dr. Neha, thank you for accepting our invitation. It is a true delight to have you on this episode.
It's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah. Dr. Chatwani, your book Thriving in Disruption explores the concept of agile organizations. So can you explain what it truly means to be an agile organization and why it is particularly important in today's rapidly changing business environment?
So I think in a nutshell, agile organizations are learning organizations, which is why somewhere in the book I say you can actually never simply tick the box and say, now we are agile, because you can actually never stop learning. So that is really what it's about. It's about creating and sharing knowledge within an organization, but also within an ecosystem in order to navigate disruption. And for the latter part of your question, we are in a truly disruptive era, very, very unpredictable socioeconomic factors. And therefore, I think agility as a competence for organizations is becoming increasingly important.
In your book, you discuss the role of collective leadership in driving organizational success. How would you define collective leadership and how does it differ from traditional top-down leadership models?
We could speak for at least an hour on this subject, and there's, of course, a whole dedicated chapter on understanding what collective leadership means, because it is not everybody is a leader or nobody's a leader or a laissez-faire chaos. It is more about the understanding that if we are to co-create and share knowledge in an organization for agility, every single person counts. Every single person has something to contribute towards that process. A little bit like a soccer team or a football team, right? You have 11 players and you see the pain of the team when one player has to leave the field. So every single person on that team is important and every single person can shoot a goal. Collective leadership is about that understanding that leaders are not about individuals and their attributes, their personalities, and their leadership style, but that leadership is about the relationship between a group of people looking to achieve something common to them all, something they want to achieve with purpose and with value. So that's what it is in a nutshell. Obviously, it differs very much from traditional leadership, although collective leadership, of course, does not necessarily deny a formal leader. So somebody who is actually named a captain or a CEO, but it emphasizes these relationships. And it even releases the pain of the individual leader who feels in isolation the total accountability or the total decision making or the total need to have all the knowledge to navigate. It is the interaction between followership and leadership, the learned and the learning.
One of the core principles in your book is the importance of human-centric approaches in organizations. How does behavioral science play a role in shaping these human-centric agile organizations, and why is it crucial for leaders to embrace this perspective?
I can't imagine why it wouldn't be important. Organizations are made of humans, and I call them resourceful humans, not human resources, but resourceful humans, because these are the bodies and the entities that carry knowledge, and have the capacity to create and innovate more knowledge that is needed. Therefore, I think it is fundamental to focus on these human beings, and maybe even more so on the brink of the AI age that is emerging in organizations. So the behavioral science part that I raise in my book is about taking these kinds of experiments with caution. So I think in management school, we learn a lot of things about human behavior that are sometimes very generalized and brought to us in a very static way. But human relations are very dynamic. People and their contexts are constantly evolving. Maslow's pyramid was not made of snow. It is a phase-driven idea where the phases may not be stacked upon each other in this very static way that we learn it. I cite Pavlov's dog. If we reduce all behavior into a stimulus and reaction, we're losing actually the holistic approach to human nature. And so my appeal is, if we want to gauge all of the knowledge that people bring to an organization, then we have to see them as whole human beings as well and treat them in this way.
You encourage readers to challenge conventional definitions and assumptions in management theory. Could you share an example from the book where you propose a shift in thinking that leaders and organizations should adopt?
So I mentioned two already by speaking about Pavlov and Maslow. There's also another experiment that we often cite in team building when we talk about storming and norming and performing. Again, those are not phases that come in that sequence. They can often be there can often be a step back to storming if there's a different context. So my encouragement is to see these things as assumptions, which is what they are, and to kind of play with them and see them as elastic models. Obviously, I challenge the conventional understanding of leadership by proposing collective leadership. I challenge some of the tools that we use in human resources. Are we really sure that behavioral interviews are bringing us the candidates we need for jobs? Shouldn't we be looking more at people's ability to learn, their curiosity, their ability to communicate, rather than what they have done in the past as a predictor of what we might need in the future? Well, I'm not going to reveal everything that's in the book now, Deepak, and there's just a few ideas, and I think there are quite a lot of ideas in the book in this direction.
The journey to creating an agile organization, as outlined in your book, sounds like a transformative process. What are some practical steps that business leaders and HR practitioners can take to begin this journey within their organizations?
So every chapter in this book has at least one box of tips. And as I mentioned earlier on, there are many tools, but I think the primary underlying tool is what I called the guiding star. And, maybe I'll just pick up the book so that I get all the aspects of this guiding star. But basically, the idea is that everything you do in the organization should be linked to the purpose of the organization, and it should be clear for every person who is doing something. What is the purpose? What are we trying to achieve? How are we trying to achieve this? What is the impact of what we are trying to achieve? And I think this conversation around the guiding star is the one that will enable a team to move forward in cohesion, right? So even when we might disagree, in the end, if we are looking for the same thing, and sometimes I think in organizations people are not, which is why this conversation is important, then inevitably one of us will have to say, okay, yeah, maybe I'm not quite aligned. Or both of us will say, maybe we're both not aligned and we need to look for a third option. So I think using the guiding star is a good starting point.
In thriving in disruption, you emphasize the need for business leaders to step up and make a difference. What advice would you offer to those who may feel hesitant and unsure about embracing change in their organizations?
I think it was one of the reasons I wrote the book, is because in my work, I found that many people wanted to do things differently, to lead differently, to manage their teams differently, but they weren't quite sure how. And I think with the candid humor that's in the book and the tips and the tools, actually anybody who would like to try something out can start in any one place there, whether it's radical listening, whether it's starting with the principle of consent. There are a lot of ideas in there, but as you know, I invite the reader to create their own ideas, right? So it's actually just a trigger for people to say, let's do this meeting differently. Like, I'm not going to lead the meeting. Let somebody else moderate the meeting in the team. That could be the smallest starting point, right, to trying out collective leadership.
Given the current climate of disruption and uncertainty, how can organizations sustain the changes they make toward becoming more agile without losing their core values and sense of purpose?
I think actually that if organizations embrace the idea of agility being what it is, continuous learning, then this in fact will make them stronger. This will make them sustainable. If there's an openness to understanding that people you have recruited are brilliant, that you trust them, and that they can do much more than this one single role that you have recruited them for. And oftentimes in organizations, I get very excited when I tell them, I don't think you even know what you know, because you don't even know the potential of all of your staff, since you have only interviewed them for one position and you think that's the position they should be sitting on. But probably they can do much, much more, and they would be curious to learn much, much more. So I think that if an organization or the leader of a team in an organization truly follows the attitude of agility, because agility is a mindset and collective leadership is also not a leadership style, it's an attitude for leadership, then I think it's a very sustainable way forward.
Your book is filled with insights that are relevant for bold business leaders and impact entrepreneurs. How can smaller entrepreneurial ventures apply the principles of agile organizations and collective leadership in a way that is both scalable and sustainable?
Well, ironically, the idea for the book came from small entrepreneurs. It didn't actually come from the big corporate world. And then somebody said to me, couldn't this also be used in, big tanker organizations that need to shift from, A to B and become a little bit more creative? So I think that for small entrepreneurs, the only small piece of advice I would add is they shouldn't forget the ecosystem they function in. So I think there's a tendency to think that you must have everything inside your organization, but see your organization as an ecosystem, including your suppliers, including your customers, and open it up and work with that ecosystem. Look for people who have similar values, who behave in a similar way in business. And then I think it's a very sustainable way forward for smaller businesses as well.
Dr. Neha, my last question. Finally, as you continue to work with organizations and leaders around the world, what do you see as the future of agile organizations and the role of leadership in the next 5 to 10 years? What can organizations do today to prepare for that future?
Well, Deepak, I wish I had a crystal ball. I think what is definitely coming is AI. There is going to be a massive increase in global virtual teams, asynchronous teams, and AI. And it's very difficult for us to really gauge what that means. We're on the brink of, I think, a huge change at the workplace. I remember I was at a conference when somebody said to me that AI is a little bit like the lion cub in your backyard, and you're not quite sure, is it going to grow up to be a friendly pussycat, or is it actually going to be a dangerous, wild, grown-up lion? And I think that's where we are. It's actually difficult for anybody to say for sure. At the same time, I think that if one is not open enough to at least learn about different ways of leadership and the possibility of managing organizations in a different way than we have done so far, it will be a very painful process through this disruption. And I think that it's a good time for people to simply rethink where they are and be open to try out new things.
Thank you, Dr. Neha. We deeply appreciate your time and expertise. It has been a true pleasure having you on this episode, and we are grateful for the insight you have shared with us today. Thank you once again for joining us.
Thank you.